Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner.
This interview was with Michael Genese, the composer of The Highest Arm for Flute and Electronics. We had a great chat today. What were some things you particularly enjoyed hearing about, Nicole?
That was such a fun conversation, and I felt like there was this theme kind of threaded through all of their answers, really. This theme of service and such a kindness and a generosity. I feel like, one of the things we talked about was just how many different hats Michael wears as a teacher, as a performer, as an audio engineer, and as a composer. And it seemed like what kept coming up again and again was their desire to support other groups or help other groups. And even in their K through 5 general music teaching, that sense of being so excited to be able to teach important things to their classes. So I thought that was really inspiring.
I enjoyed some of our conversation about identity. It's not particularly often that you get to have such a thought-provoking and thoughtful conversation about different identities within society and within the music community, and then turn around and also talk about teaching elementary school students. More from Michael?
Yeah, let's get to it. Michael Genese, they is a composer, educator, tenor, and multi-instrumentalist. They are also the winner of FNMC's 2022 composition competition in the flute and piano or electronics category. With work converging in social justice, principles of sound, and contextual human experience, Michael's work asks how artistic, sonic, and educational mediums can best reveal new understandings of the self, and how the presence of intersectionality in our thinking can be fostered through our interactions with music. Genese is a co-producer on the Choral Commons, the founding member of Voices 21C. They hold degrees in music education, vocal performance, and music composition, having studied with Timo Andres, Hannah Lash, and Missy Mazzoli. And they teach private violin, piano, and voice lessons in New York City. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here. And thank you, sincere thank you for choosing my piece. I really appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. The cool thing is, I was super excited about your piece, which we're about to dive into just personally. But the great thing is that, these competitions are all membership driven. And so you got a whole bunch of votes from a whole bunch of people, hands down. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, Elizabeth, you pointed this out to me too, but I feel like it was a really strong category. We got some really nice finalist pieces this year.
I was excited about all of the finalists this year.
Yeah.
I am excited to get to know the winning piece as well.
Yeah. So let's dive into it. Yeah, because The Highest Arm definitely won the popularity contest despite some really stiff competition. So your winning piece, The Highest Arm for amplified flute and fixed electronics, has a very interesting backstory. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, and at the time when I was writing that piece, this is for contextualization for folks who don't know, it's like fall 2020, right? We're pre-vaccine. For a lot of freelancers, like unemployment benefits are not around. Like right. Outdoor dining is coming back, or no, it's coming up for the first time actually, for folks who didn't have it before. So like I'm working a coffee job in my neighborhood. Like I am taking a semester off of grad school. I'm not trying to do Zoom school, and like there is like a context that like it feels so far away from now actually, but it was only a couple of years ago.
Like, right.
And like there were just a lot of intersecting realities that were sort of mushing into each other at the time. And I think like probably the program note is the most concise, but there are the racial justice protests that went on in the summer that are still continuing into the fall. One group specifically that I was playing music for protests with at the time. We were weekly with this group called the Stonewall Protests, which focused specifically on the state of emergency Black trans women are in still, that's often shadowed out entirely when we say his name, say her name, to actually fully embed not only topics of race, but topics of gender and gender variance. These are intersecting struggles that often result in a lot of people being completely erased in conversations where they should be at the center, really. And these groups are still continuing to gather and to be in the street. And at the same time, a lot of the primarily white people who left the city to March 2020 towards suburbia, towards places they consider home, still, like, they're coming back because they're thinking, oh, it's a little safer, and we're seeing them out at brunch. and some of them are, I think it's fair to say, expecting a pre-COVID New York to continue being their theme park, to continue being the place that they can enjoy. And this piece is primarily through the electronics, trying to combine all of these different perceptions of what the present day is right now at the time. Like, there are people who are trying to get the old reality. There are people who are trying to completely abolish the old reality and commit to taking care of each other better. And to have it all sort of mushed together at that time was really disorienting, and still continues to be, I think, the way we navigate COVID now, especially. You can almost feel yourself pushing up against another person's idea of what normal is, or what acceptable is, or what safe is, what caring is. Like, it's an odd thing to describe maybe in words, but this piece is hopefully a nice snapshot of what was going on in fall 2020.
Wow, well put. Yeah. And your experience in New York is, as you're describing it, I'm thinking about things that I've read about in the New York Times or seen on the news. Living out in Colorado and teaching in Southern Wyoming, my experience has been much more simplistic in a way. I think for a lot of us, our regions have informed to some extent what our experience has been. I've just been driving around Wyoming, working with public school flute players in middle schools and high schools, and there's no memory of COVID ever happening. I'm getting hugged by seventh graders, no masks, everyone's shaking hands, and so I appreciate the complexity of what you're describing. Actually, I appreciate that it was that complex somewhere anyway.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying really matters. I don't think we've ever been more aware of the sheer volume of people that are nearby, right? Like, and how much that actually matters. Like, there are millions of us in New York, like, all on top of each other, basically. And there's that ridiculous graph, right, of Manhattan, where, like, the lower half of Manhattan is the entire population of South Dakota.
Oh, really?
And the upper half is the entire population of North Dakota.
Wow.
Like when we think about how that actually plays out, like, I do some work in rural areas, and like, I think about it and I'm like, okay, the amount of people I'm seeing all week right now is the same amount of people I see on a subway car for 10 minutes sometimes. Wow. Like, it's just different. It's really different. So the way we gather and the amount of people that are involved in the experiences that are either different or similar that everyone there brings into the space, like, that's really foundationally shaped how we've moved through the past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of people and the last couple of years, as we were getting to know your piece, The Highest Arm, and as members were voting on The Highest Arm, they were listening to the recording that you submitted. And they didn't necessarily know that they were listening to a mutual friend of FNMC's and yours, but that recording was performed by Yoshi Weinberg. How do you two know each other?
Yes, and it's funny because I didn't necessarily know that Yoshi knew y'all, or like I didn't realize that was a mutual connection, but we actually met just before I wrote the piece, I think. We were in a performance together that was outside in a park in Brooklyn. It was done by the Black Box Ensemble and Sound Off Music for Bail. We were performing Feminine by Julius Eastman, which is a pretty long, not aleatoric work, but it was a beautiful endeavor for the time. And I first met them when they were standing behind me at that performance. And then I think really the next day or a couple of days afterwards, this group in the city called Chamber Queer was hosting this like gathering in the park of musicians just to hang out, really. And Yoshi was there, and yeah, so those, I don't know, that 48 hours or so, that's when I came to know them. And I think they were one of the first flutists who looked at this piece really just to make sure that it wasn't alarming or or what I'm asking for makes sense. And they're like, it's admiring how deeply committed they are to the flute and to the practice. And it's just been a pleasure to know them, really. It was really around the same time I wrote the piece that I met them.
That's really fantastic. It's such a small world in so many ways.
Yeah, it's nice when it's a pleasant small world. I remember listening to that recording as I was doing my voting, and I was like, oh, this flute playing is so beautiful. I want to know who this is. And then, I was able to look it up after it went, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Yoshi.
Yeah, of course. That's great.
I love that you two get to work together. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Maybe this is childish of me, but I always get excited and drawn to intriguing titles that I don't know the meaning of. So I'm going to throw one at you, Michael. You have another chamber piece for flute, clarinet, violin, and cello that you wrote back in 2017 in the Before Times called Graze at, Pause, Then Fired. I Put Him All Into My Arms.
Oh,
Can you tell us about this piece? What does it mean?
For sure. And like I think I meant to say this when you asked about the winning piece, like, or in this case, the highest arm, like I think I should have addressed that, like what does that even mean? But I think about that as like, a gesture towards power, like who has the most resources, who is the most visible, who is the loudest, who is the highest on the ladder. But also from like a perspective of resistance, like whose fist is raised the highest, this idea of arms. Like it can be all of those things. Like I think titles are important. Yeah. Like they don't have to mean just one thing, they can mean many things. But this piece is Grace at Pause and Fired is definitely from the Before Times. But I was teaching public school music full time at that point, and I hadn't really considerably written for woodwinds at all. Like I had written for them before, but nothing that I was like, it was mostly exercises or things that are kind of more practical. And I wanted to actually do it, quote unquote, and have a piece for this instrumentation. And Hub New Music, the same instrumentation that this is written for, they were having this commission proposal for a residency that ended up getting canceled, I believe, or there was just some logistical hoo-ha, and they didn't actually get to accept any new work. But once I heard that, I'm like, I still want to write this, I think. So I didn't set this text perhaps, but I used it as like a platform to move forward with. There's this E.E. Cummings poem that sort of recontextualizes the story of the Good Samaritan. And he does a really great job at it. I think the title is A Man Who Had Fallen Among Thieves. That's the title of the Cummings version. And I used the Good Samaritan story basically to just track how the instruments behave with each other, like the sort of programmatic journey they go on. And it was very fun. I think the Boston New Music Initiative read it in the Before Times. As far as a forward-facing premiere, I don't think it's actually had one, actually, now that you mention it. But I hold that piece dear to my heart. It was really foundational in a lot of ways for me to write that.
Wow. Good to know, especially listeners who might be looking for some new to them mixed chamber music. So it's easily found on your website. Cool.
Yeah.
Beyond these two, and you've got some more orchestral works listed on your website as well, but beyond this chamber piece and the highest arm, the flute doesn't currently seem to take up a lot of space in your catalog so far. Are there any other flute-centric plans in the works? And you can combine these questions however you wish. But I also always wonder as a flutist, what are your thoughts on writing for flute? What's challenging? What do you enjoy doing? What would you like to do with it in the future?
Totally. Yeah. There, this past this latter half of this year, I think the past few months, I've been working on a wind quintet with electronics.
Cool.
So it's been just sort of really a passion project. I have a brass quintet with electronics. I have a string quartet with electronics, and I'm like, I should just do a wind quintet with electronics. And it feels kind of like it makes sense, and I want to step into that right now. So that's going to be read probably in December with a couple of groups. I'm expecting like a final draft to be something like early 2023. But I'm really looking forward to how that's shaping up. And I also have this Piero piece that is not done, but I was writing it right when like the Delta variant came to be, and like, and I really struggled with more than like one performer or no performers. Like those were my ideals when like variants were really in our faces, just because it was like, if I don't have humans to write this for who want to perform it, like, you know, I like when I just go in that direction, like I did with the wind quintet, I'm like, I just kind of want to do this. As a composer, I think I actually really struggle with that. It's like I want human beings with tendencies and tastes to write for, and like the promise that it'll actually be performed without, you know, the conditions that like variants bring about that are so limiting or kind of feel so bleak at the time for at least a few weeks or a couple months.
Right.
So yeah, there was a point where I said, you know, that PR piece, it is going to be on pause, and like, you know, someday I send it when folks are looking for work proposals for PR ensembles, but I don't, there was a point where I said, I'm not going to push this, and it's, you know, it's kind of frozen as is right now, but I look forward to it. Or whether I chuck it and just do something entirely different, I look forward to a PRO piece someday. Yeah. But the flute, like I don't personally play the flute, but I really like writing for it. You know, I think most composers gravitate towards instruments they know how to play. So like reconciling that relationship where I don't, I know that what I'm writing is possible, but it is not possible for me. Like I've tried to play some of the music I've written, but like I feel like I want to pass out. Like I don't have the stamina to play the flute. So I like it. It lives in a different box for me than the instruments I know, of course, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm going to pass out too, Michael. So
and thank you for your condolences at this time. I appreciate the solidarity.
We've all been there. No.
That's great.
In a more general sense, what do you want performers to know about your perspective as the composer of the music that they're playing?
Right. Yeah. And I think especially for the piece that won here, or like when I'm assuming, you know, the folks who are primarily listening to this conversation are coming at this from that piece, right? Like I think a lot about the idea of proximity work when I have a piece of music on the table. Like there are rooms that we are in and there are rooms that we're not in, and sometimes we've chosen to be in those rooms. Sometimes people with more power than us have put us in those rooms on purpose, or told us that those rooms are the ones we want to be in, or the ones we're destined to be in. Some of us are told to be in, you know, undergrad degrees and master's degrees. Some of us are told to be in prisons. Like there are different rooms that we end up in, and the people we are allowed to talk to, who are easiest to talk to, you know, those conditions are all circumstantial. And like a piece like The Highest Arm, especially this other version of it that is included with the piece, The Highest Arm is also used as the finale of a sound walk I've written about police brutality in New York. And the original version, like I kind of alluded to, this idea of like brunch and you know, people gathering sort of to be served, and then there are people in the street gathering for a very different reason, like this idea of rooms and proximity and how they brush up against each other. It can be kind of ugly, it can be kind of uncomfortable. The soundwalk version of this piece, you know, you don't have these if you've heard the piece, like the electronics voices are there's like this kind of like whiny customer and this whiny waiter. They're like sort of in the background, sort of having disparate surface level kind of painful conversation with each other about the menu. But in the sound log version, like that's replaced with anonymous testimony and like footage of police violence, and like that's just a very different room from the room that performers and composers, you know, like ivory towers that we usually have to go to be better at what we do, right? Like we're not thinking about the street so much. And like if we see the street, if we see violence, quote unquote, as people who are privileged enough to be in ivory towers, like maybe it's in movies or TV shows. It's not really in real life, but this is real life, which I think is important to note. And when we put this piece in a concert hall, or put these topics in a concert hall, like we're intentionally removing the big proximity that's in place by design. We allow people to engage with the topics of American policing, of race, and where they might just be engaging with like a Mozart quartet, or you know, like something that is maybe, you know, just as honorable as far as like craft and artistic discipline goes, but not necessarily as engaged with what is going on outside of the building. So that comes to mind as far as perspective goes. Like we kind of don't get to I don't know, absent-mindedly just choose this piece and these topics and assume they don't engage in a conversation with what's going on around us. Like to put this piece in a concert hall is a choice, or it can be a departure in some ways from what we might put there instead.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it is funny, particularly to, you know, go to a recital and hear maybe a piece like this. And there are more and more really interesting, thought-provoking pieces that we're getting to play, which I love. But then you'll hear that back to back with, you know, Schubert Arpeggione or something. It's just like, what,
Sure.
what were you thinking here? What world are we in? And I think we get pulled in a lot of directions too. I mean, I've certainly been guilty of doing that at my academic institution, because I feel like I'm trying to play important music, but then also model stuff that my superiors who evaluate me would like to see me model.
Right. It's like, it's by design, you know, like it's not just like there's music like this, but there's also the music that, like you said, that people consider as the most valuable. And like the people who consider that have like they make decisions about your life and your job.
Yeah, those,
so
those are the brunching people.
Yeah, like you can't just subvert that all the time. Like there's this like you mentioned in my bio, this group that I work with a lot, Voices 21C, they like we have yearly worked with currently and formerly incarcerated people and artists, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like to perform with someone who's been incarcerated on stage, or to have someone call in from a prison phone, like you're kind of injecting another room into the room that you're in.
Yeah.
And like it's sometimes, I mean, especially for folks who are in colleges, like sometimes it's the first time they've seen an incarcerated person ever.
Sure.
It's sometimes the first time they've heard their voice, and especially if they're like performing, you know, it's sometimes the first time you're able to humanize them, you know, like that, to actually, you know, like you said, we can't subvert what the people in charge of us think is important. But when we kind of really interrogate what we can do within our power, like music can be really, we can, I don't know, it sounds a bit militant, but we can really weaponize it in a way that is useful. And I think this piece can do that too.
Yeah, I like that. Sounds helpful. I'm so interested to see what concerts look like 10 years from now. You know, I mean, I would love to see, well, I would love to see all kinds of things, but yeah, I mean, you bring up such interesting ideas about where we're coming from and where we're going, and what purpose the concert stage might have in the future that is different from what we've been trained to think.
Yeah, and like sometimes it sounds a lot harder than it actually might be.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there are a lot of well-meaning people who just don't know how to engage with these topics in rooms where they're not being discussed. And in 10 years or so, like, when people have more opportunities to do so, and or at least some more scaffolding, I don't know, to sort of come at it without any idea or any body of people to converse with, or like, I don't know, it can be kind of lonely and independent to do it sometimes, or to do this work and just sort of like out of the goodness of our hearts, or like, I don't know, with earnest interest in doing this kind of work where we shape what concerts look like. But it's not always met with like sort of stone resistance from the people in the room. Sometimes people are actually quite excited.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. You mentioned another group that you work with, and I wanted to talk about the breadth of your bio. Because I got really excited, and I also thought, oh dear, is Michael okay? Like, I guess my first question is, do you need some Advil right now? But let's just back up and review a little bit. So the teaching page of your website lists private lessons, children's chorus, and K-5 music, as you mentioned earlier today. You're a tenor, you're a pianist, you have violin lessons listed as well, right? You've done audio and video engineer work. So again, I'm going to throw a couple questions at you, and you can decide how you want to combine them. But what I wondered as I read your bio was, how do you make space in your schedule to create despite all of these responsibilities? And how, conversely, maybe how do these activities help inform your compositional work in a unique way?
Right. It's really overwhelming when you list them off, Nicole.
Yeah, I thought so too. You're amazing.
No. I think the past 5 years especially have been about balance, or just trying to strike good balance with what I like to do. And like, everything comes in phases. Like some of these things are weekly in my life, like I'm weekly teaching, or I'm weekly, for example, like my weekly church appointment as a singer. There are some things that are scheduled that kind of way, but there are other things on like a freelance basis that happen 5 or 6 times a year, like a specific gig on a certain instrument, or like a commission type thing. Like, it's not always all at once all of the time. Or like there's a world where I could say, like, I get up at 5 a.m. and I burn the candle at both ends, and I'm always practicing every instrument that I play, and my vocal technique is always ready to go at a moment's notice. And like, that's just, no one does that. Like, nobody can do that. But at the same time, we live in a culture that really likes to think that we can. And maybe we feel like kind of compelled to say, oh, I can do all of that all of the time, and just be honest. We're like, we're only one person. Like, I would need a lot of Advil, right? So it just doesn't work that way. But on like a micro level, all of these different things, like you sort of suggested, they do influence each other. Like, if my audio engineering work and my electronics design, for example, like anytime I work on one of those things, I'm getting better at both of them, I feel, or I'm getting more comfortable at both. And when you're in that kind of work, like production work, like when I go to write a large ensemble piece, or I'm thinking about orchestration or arranging, like I'm not necessarily thinking about like the lowest instruments and the highest instruments, but I'm thinking about like a frequency spectrum of like the lows, the mids, and the highs of the sounds that like you might EQ in a production job or something. Like, I think listeners who are also in that kind of work, or work with sound design, can probably empathize with that. But that's not like music theory knowledge or orchestration knowledge. It's just sort of overlap.
Yeah. Anything? I'm so curious about the K-5 music.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And I mean,
because that's something that I think a lot of people sort of push away from. Like, many people have a music education degree, but then they move on past that and do the fancy things and don't come back to that. But you're really when you're doing that, you're really working in the grassroots among the people kind of work, right?
And I love it. I want to make that super clear, I love working with kids. I think that's actually probably one of my favorite things. Like,
Lucky them.
yeah, I know, because there are a lot of people who would not say the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, I love being like, oh yeah, I taught that kid what a quarter note is today, or I taught them how to feel pulse today. And at least in my education degree, I found that whenever I was in middle school or high school, especially in this country, like you're still teaching them what the quarter note is. Or like, at least with the way your curriculum is designed, where you actually have to insist that they know what a quarter note is, because that's not exactly how music has to be taught per se, but based on your standards, your district's priorities, like you're always playing catch up in some kind of way with older students. And I liked the idea that, oh, I can actually just teach them right the first time. And the teacher that gets them after me might just totally not reinforce those concepts, and by the time they get to high school, they're going to need to know again, and whatever I did, it is in vain. But that's like really circumstantial and a bit of a spiral, so I'm not so worried about that all the time. But when I went for my master's, which was right before the pandemic started, I was teaching full-time, but I obviously had to stop for that. And I'm not teaching full-time right now. I think I have mostly individual students at the same age level, some group settings as well, but I'm not like when I was writing Grey's Up, Pause and Fired, and I was like writing full-time, it took me months to finish pieces that now take a few weeks maybe. Like it's just a different, like I said, striking balance. But I struggled with that deeply in school as well. In my master's, it was like, there are no kids. It's a bunch of like really stuffy adults, and it's so boring. Like it's and there were some great adults too, I don't want to chop it up to that, but as far as like the playfulness in your day-to-day, it's just so different. But striking balance is like, I found to honor my creative work, I really needed to do that. I couldn't just teach full-time. I mean, I loved it, but it also felt like I needed way more Advil, or I had to be 7 people, which is like the public school teachers' plight. So it's impossible to have balance in those settings. It's true.
Well, your teachers or your students sound very lucky. This would be if Advil's listening.
Yeah, we're not sponsored by them, but
but we could.
I would like to be.
Yeah, there are a few grants you wouldn't have to apply for, I guess.
Well, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but the next question we were wanting to ask was, what do you think the biggest challenges in your profession, or in your case, professions, are right now? And does that tie in any way to challenges you think are facing classical music generally?
Right. Yeah, we did touch a bit on this. And this other group I do work with extensively, that's done a lot of podcasts, especially during the pandemic, called the Choral Commons, has really interrogated this from like a choral perspective. But like you said, like some of the problems that might just be in the choral sphere are not just exclusive to that. They permeate other parts of music. And on the topic of stuffy adults and institutions, like this, that's on my mind right now, at least. There's like, we are all, some institutions are thankfully branching out from this in really beautiful ways, but those that are on the more traditional side, like, we are put in a training program for a job that existed in the 19th century. Like, we are like, you are a performer, like, you play the flute. And if you're more than that, that's too complicated. And like, it's very Western, obviously, but like, this isn't even just like a classical music problem. This is like a working class problem. Like, you can't just have one job that's full-time with benefits and also afford rent. Like, you are job juggling. If you're just a flutist, if you're just a violinist, like, the world is demanding that you be sort of many, many, many things. But at the same time, if you are, like, there are people in power in the arts industries and in other industries that, if you are not just an expert at one thing, they kind of find you to be untrustworthy. And they're like, oh, well, you're not always doing that, so I want a person who is fully committed to the flute. And if you're not, then someone else, whoever, this other person who says they're fully convinced that the flute is probably more of what we need, but like these realities just kind of don't exist together. Like, we can't just grow up or move through the world in a job that was around 200 years ago, or the idea that that's going to be our day to day. So that we did kind of talk about that a bit earlier, but what we're trained to do, and then the field on the outside, I think higher ed is definitely trying to grapple with that, the difference between those two realities. But like, that's also just the fact that we have to go to the amount of money we pour into this to get whatever we get out of it, the amount of generational work that is required of the people that came before us and our families, and the safety nets we need to do this kind of thing. It creates a real barrier to access for people just to engage with arts as something they do in their lives. The whole structure is really limiting, or the people that you see graduating and the people that you see who want to be artistic, even just in humble and completely valid ways in their lives, like it's a very small percentage of the amount of people who could be artistic, or just get a music degree because they feel like it and not because they have to make it their entire lives. Or the way it's structured is kind of bizarre.
That's a great understatement. Kind of.
Yeah. We're all just sitting here nodding on the podcast where no one can see our faces. Like,
so many old examples from the past 20 years and conversations being had with students and everything. Yeah, kind of converging there. Yeah. You wrapped it all up there, Michael. Yeah, for years I struggled. I was just like the annoying nag in the room saying, can we please start teaching some music entrepreneurship classes? Can we please start teaching some music entrepreneurship classes at my school for years? And even that term feels like, it becomes a gimmick or something, but there can be real substance behind it.
Right.
And it's trying to get at that. Yeah, you can be a great musician, but if all you can do is lock yourself in a windowless room and play, good luck to you. And I had a colleague who is a stunning musician. I mean, truly a stunning player. And she's about 15 years older than me, so she was full professor in this meeting and had made it, I guess, in the old school way with the recordings and the international touring career and things. And she said, They don't need more distractions, Nicole. They just need to practice more. Our students don't practice enough. And I mean, it's such a disconnect between what we're trying to get that. And I think in our generation and younger, all of us are more willing to talk about, I was sold this very simplistic picture in school, and I got a lot out of school. I want to be grateful, but man, the number of things I've had to do since graduating to actually piece together a career that nobody mentioned, it's irresponsible. It's just flat out irresponsible. Like, just go practice more and then something magical will appear before you. No.
Yeah, and what you said about distraction, I think that's a great way to put it. That as far as the problem is concerned, like when I was an undergrad, I was in voice lessons, I was in violin lessons, I was in orchestra, I was in choir, I was in education, and not every teacher, but some teachers really, the best they could muster was tolerance at that, it was mostly disdain, but because it was a distraction to them. It was like, oh, you're not able to learn this aria all of the time now. Yeah. But my violin teacher, a couple others as well, I want to be mindful of that. But my violin teacher especially, she really encouraged that I do all of these things. And I that has stayed with me. I carry that with me profoundly. To actually be affirmed that it's not a distraction. Amazing. That in some of the lessons I had with her, it's I learned more about my voice, my singing voice, in my violin lessons some weeks than I did in my voice lessons. It is a Western philosophy that everything should be in boxes, or that disciplines don't cross over, because it's not as easy to discuss, or it's not as simplistic, or it's not as packageable. But but it's not a distraction. Like if you're feeling called to, like, I don't know, play the bassoon, like whatever, play the bassoon. Like,
Yeah.
and in my education degree, that was the only environment where I got a methods course on every instrument family. You know, I actually got to learn the physics of the bassoon and the flute. Like, and that, if it wasn't for that, the piece that won here probably wouldn't even be here. Like, but composers didn't get that, you know, educators did. And so, like, of course, not one person's experience is not everybody's, but having these distractions can be really enriching sometimes for what someone thinks they're a distraction for or whatever. Like, it actually makes you better.
Yeah. Well, that was a great segue into the next question I want to ask you. And this is something that we like to ask everybody in some form. Maybe it'll stay in this vein or maybe not, but what is your advice for composers just starting out right now?
Yeah, and there are a few teacher friends who teach some composers classes that hand this question to me for their students, and like, there's a lot I could probably say, but I think practically, for folks who are, especially for folks who are using like notation software or like thinking about composing in that situation, get out of the notation software.
Really?
Yeah. Just get out of it. I mean, learn how to use it, of course, but like, I mean, we need to be able to notate legibly at a point. But as far as like the creative process goes, like, don't be an editor first. You know, like, I think every composer who sort of like downloaded the free version of Finale when they were in like middle school or high school, or, you know, like, you end up writing music that only sounds good in the playback feature of these programs.
Right.
And because I mean, in a way, if you're alone, like, that's the only way you get to hear it. If your inner ear isn't really developed, and it probably shouldn't be when you're that young, depending on whatever you've had access to, maybe it's different. But like, if you put your favorite piece into Sibelius or Finale and hit play, you're gonna hate it. Like, it's just not not a parameter that makes sense to write for. Like, when I started writing on real paper, when I started writing, you know, like at the piano with my voice memo app running on record or something, like, when you really put the music into your body, I feel like you get somewhere different, or at least get somewhere that those programs maybe can't get you. They can be really inspiring, especially like, you know, you have this program where, oh, I can put any notes in here and then it'll play it back to me. That's kind of cool. Like, that's definitely cool. But it's also really limiting if you really if you end up writing to have that end goal be like the pinnacle of your satisfaction with a piece. Like, oh, it sounds really great right now when I hit play, and rather than, oh, this can go to my friend who plays the flute, or, you know, I have a friend who plays this instrument, maybe I can like make some food for them or knit for them and be like, you know, please help me with this idea, or I want to write this piece for flute. What do you want to play? Or like, if you make it a human activity, or when you make it a human activity, I think it's a lot more rewarding than hitting play, or having it be such an isolating experience. Sometimes it's necessary to work alone, of course, but it can't be the end of your music. You know, if you just want to catalog and shelf everything you do, that you know, without a premiere or a human attached to it, you know, if that's something you're fine with, maybe like that's totally okay. But if you're looking to get out of that, yeah, getting it into your body is actually is something I think about a lot. Just different means of making the music real.
Wow.
Yeah. I guess switching gears to another question we like to ask everybody to end things out. What are three pieces? What are three pieces you are listening to right now?
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, the church I work at is doing Bach Cantata 33, so that's been in my head quite a lot.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, that's like a really traditional answer, I guess, which is maybe not.
It's the thing you're listening to right now.
Yeah, alongside, you know, whatever else. But that is one. Bjork just dropped her new album with clarinets about mushrooms. called Thesaura, and that whenever we get a new Bjork album, it feels like Christmas. So that's been in my head a lot. And also there is this Brooklyn composer, Oh Young. They came out with this ambient work called Imagine Naked. It's this album of ambient instrumental music, and it is just, it came out maybe in, I want to say like April or May, and it has just been like a sponge for like my sorrows and my joys. I have that on like every other day practically. It's just like, it's not addicting, but it's just beautiful. So like when I'm thinking about what I'm listening to, that there usually is like a token ambient work that is just like on my commute or like during my work or during nothing, during stillness. Like that album has been, I don't want to say in that slot, but I've just been listening to it maybe too much. It's just really beautiful.
That's awesome.
I love this question. You all are helping me develop my library. I always hear new answers.
Rad. That's great.
I like that Bach and Bjork showed up in the same sentence. I think that
and they should, as they should.
I think that made me very happy.
Right.
Michael, Genese, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
All of us, thank you so much. And again, really sincere thank you for choosing the piece.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com. Support for this podcast comes in part from the Flute New Music Consortium. FNMC serves as a catalyst for collaborations between contemporary flutists and composers by commissioning new works, amplifying select recent works, organizing simultaneous premieres, and encouraging repeat performances of all FNMC-sponsored works. To learn more, visit www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com today.